They held her face against the hot radiator. The burn unit nurse was her mum. The radiator's metal ridges burned like branding irons against Zara Chen's left cheek, the hiss of flesh meeting scorching steel echoing through the empty chemistry lab. Madison Thornfield's manicured fingers pressed harder against the back of Zara's skull, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the afternoon light as 3 other girls held Zara's arms. The smell of burning skin mixed with Madison's vanilla perfume and the acrid scent of fear sweat that no amount of deodorant could mask. "Say it again," Madison hissed, her breath hot against Zara's ear. "Tell everyone how your trashy mom couldn't even afford real Uggs for you." Zara's eyes watered from the pain, but she bit down on her tongue, hard enough to taste copper. The phone cameras were rolling. She could hear the distinctive camera click sounds of Instagram stories being recorded, 7 different angles of her humiliation broadcasting live to hundreds of followers. The radiator's heat penetrated deeper, past skin into muscle, but Zara focused on something else entirely. The way Madison's grip had loosened just slightly, how her breathing had changed. Training that most 17-year-olds didn't possess kicked in automatically. "Come on, scholarship girl," taunted Britt Hawthorne, Madison's lieutenant. "Your mum cleans bedpans for a living. Just admit you don't belong here." The other students pressed closer, their excited murmurs creating a wall of sound that would mask any audio on the recordings. This wasn't random cruelty. This was theater, performed for an audience that included half the senior class at Ridgefield Academy. The private school's pristine hallways had witnessed worse, but never anything quite this public, this filmed, this potentially permanent. Zara's left cheek felt like it was on fire, the radiator's metal pattern embedding itself into her skin with surgical precision. But her mind remained eerily calm, cataloguing details with the methodical precision her father had taught her during those summer training sessions she'd never mentioned to anyone. Madison Thornfield, daughter of tech billionaire Robert Thornfield, whose donations had funded the new science wing. Britt Hawthorne, father owned half the commercial real estate in town. Ashley Crane, mother sat on the school board. Kennedy Walsh, family connections ran 3 generations deep in local politics, all of them untouchable, all of them recording. "I smell bacon," someone called out, and the crowd erupted in laughter. The sound bounced off the lab's high ceilings, mixing with the steady hum of the radiator that continued its work. Zara could feel the blister forming, skin separating from skin in layers. The pain should have been unbearable, but instead she found herself thinking about surface area and heat transfer, about the thermal conductivity of human tissue. Her AP chemistry knowledge kicked in at the strangest moments. Madison's phone buzzed against Zara's shoulder. "Oh my God, we're at like 2,000 views already," she squealed. "This is going to be everywhere by tonight." The pressure against Zara's head increased, and she could feel Madison's rings. The family crest ring, the promise ring from her boyfriend, the class ring that cost more than most families' monthly grocery budget. Each piece of jewelry left its own tiny impression as Madison ground Zara's face deeper into the radiator's unforgiving surface. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Madison released her grip and stepped back, her perfectly styled blonde hair not even mussed from the exertion. The others followed suit, leaving Zara to slowly peel her face away from the radiator. The sound it made, skin separating from hot metal, would haunt the dreams of everyone present, though none of them would admit it later. Zara straightened slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. The left side of her face bore the clear imprint of the radiator's grating, a pattern of raised lines and angry red squares that would take weeks to heal completely. But her dark eyes remained steady as she looked at each of her tormentors in turn. No tears, no pleading, no rage, just assessment. "Done?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small tube of medical-grade burn gel, the kind her mother brought home from the hospital, applied it with practiced efficiency while maintaining eye contact with Madison. The casual competence of her self-treatment sent a ripple of uncertainty through the crowd. This wasn't how victims were supposed to behave. There should have been crying, begging, promises to transfer schools. Instead, Zara packed up her chemistry notes with the same methodical care she'd shown before the attack, each movement precise and purposeful. "My mum's shift starts in 20 minutes, Zara said, shouldering her bag. "Burn unit at Riverside General. She's seen worse." The implication hung in the air that this was nothing, that Madison and her friends were nothing, that they had no idea what real pain looked like. As Zara walked toward the door, her reflection caught in the lab's polished steel surfaces. The burn covered nearly a quarter of her face, the pattern clearly visible even from a distance. It would photograph well, she realized, very well indeed. Behind her, the phones were still recording. The weeks that followed established a pattern as predictable as the school's morning announcements. Madison Thornfield had tasted blood in the water, and like any apex predator, she wanted more. The Radiator incident had garnered over 50,000 views across various social media platforms, spawning reaction videos and commentary threads that reached far beyond Ridgefield Academy's manicured grounds. The burn on Zara's face became her signature, a scarlet letter that marked her as prey. Tuesday morning, cafeteria, 7:47 a.m. Zara carried her tray, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice that cost more per cup than her mother spent on lunch, toward an empty table in the back corner. She'd learned to time her arrival carefully, early enough to avoid the main crowd, but late enough that the staff had finished setting up. The burn on her face had darkened to a deep purple, the Radiator's pattern still clearly visible despite her mother's professional treatment. "Hey, grill face!" the voice carried across the dining hall with perfect acoustics. Madison stood near the coffee station, surrounded by her usual entourage, phone already recording. The cafeteria's morning bustle quieted to a murmur as heads turned. This was entertainment now, a live-action drama that played out better than anything on Netflix. Zara kept walking, each step measured, each breath controlled. The ceramic floor tiles clicked under her worn sneakers, the fake Converses her mother had bought at Payless, thinking no one would notice the slightly wrong logo. Everyone noticed everything at Ridgefield Academy. "I'm talking to you," Madison called louder. "My dad's having a barbecue this weekend." "You should come. Bring your face." Laughter erupted from Madison's table, spreading like wildfire through the cafeteria. Phone cameras emerged from backpacks and pockets, multiple angles capturing Zara's solitary walk. The hashtag grillface was already trending in their local area, accompanied by memes and edited photos that made the rounds faster than homework answers. Zara reached her table and set down her tray with deliberate precision. The scrambled eggs were perfectly fluffy, the toast cut diagonally, the orange juice fresh squeezed. Everything at Ridgefield Academy was perfect, except for the students it contained. "You know what I heard?" Britt Hawthorne's voice carried from 2 tables away. "Her mom has to work double shifts just to afford the uniform cleaning. That's why she wears the same 5 outfits over and over." True, Zara owned exactly 5 regulation outfits, each one purchased second-hand from graduating seniors. Her mother pressed them every morning at 5 a.m. before leaving for the hospital. The crease lines were always perfect, even if the fabric showed signs of previous ownership. Ashley Crane joined the performance. "My mom said the only reason she got in here was because of some diversity scholarship. They needed their token poor Asian girl." Also true, though Ashley had left out the part about Zara maintaining a 4.7 GPA while taking 7 AP classes. Merit had gotten her through the door, but money determined everything else about her experience here. She probably thinks she's so smart, Kennedy Walsh added, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. Like scholarship girl thinks she can just blend in with actual Ridgefield families. Zara took a bite of scrambled eggs. They tasted like disappointment and resignation, flavored with the knowledge that complaining would only make things worse. The administration at Ridgefield Academy had a very specific way of handling discipline issues. They didn't. Not when the perpetrators' families had buildings named after them. The burn on her face throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat, but Zara had learned to compartmentalize physical pain. Her father had taught her that skill during those long summer months before he deployed, back when she was 12, and thought the worst thing in the world was missing a goal in soccer. Pain was information, nothing more. It told you where you stood, what you could endure, what you needed to survive. The cafeteria's morning symphony continued around her, the clatter of expensive ceramic plates, the hiss of the espresso machine, the animated conversations about weekend plans and college applications. Normal sounds of normal teenage life made surreal by the undercurrent of orchestrated cruelty. "She's not even eating," Madison announced to her phone. "Look at her just sitting there. It's like she doesn't even care that everyone thinks she's disgusting." But Zara was eating, methodically working her way through each item on her tray. The eggs provided protein for sustained energy. The toast offered complex carbohydrates for brain function. The orange juice contained vitamin C for tissue repair. Everything was fuel, everything was necessary. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw the videos. Are you okay? Should I call the school?" Zara typed back quickly. "I'm fine. Don't call. It'll make things worse." It would make things worse. Her mother's broken English and second-hand scrubs would become additional ammunition. The fact that she cleaned up after rich people's medical emergencies would inspire new levels of creative cruelty. Better to handle this quietly, systematically. Another text arrived. This one from an unknown number. "You deserve everything you get. Scholarship trash." Then another. "Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of." And another, "Your face looks like a waffle. Kill yourself." Zara deleted each message without reading them completely, but screenshots were already being shared across group chats. The burn on her face had become a meme, photoshopped onto waffles and grills and heating elements. Creative teenagers with unlimited data plans and too much time on their hands had turned her injury into internet content. The cafeteria began to empty as first period approached. Madison's group gathered their designer backpacks and organic smoothies, still filming, still performing. The show would continue in AP history, where they'd pass notes about Zara's appearance. Then in advanced calculus, where they'd stage whispered conversations about scholarship students lowering academic standards. Each class period brought new opportunities for creative harassment. Zara finished her breakfast and cleared her tray. The burn unit at Riverside General would be starting morning rounds soon. Her mother would check on the construction worker with third-degree burns on his hands, the child who'd pulled a pot of boiling water onto herself, the elderly woman whose oxygen tank had exploded. Real burns, real pain, real consequences. The radiator pattern on Zara's face was healing well. All things considered, clean edges, no signs of infection, minimal scarring expected. Her mother had done excellent work with the emergency treatment, applying knowledge gained from years of caring for burn victims, professional competence born from necessity and experience. But the social damage was just beginning. Thursday afternoon brought the first attempt at official intervention. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the school counselor, called Zara to her office during study hall. The woman's credentials hung framed on wood-paneled walls. PhD in educational psychology from Yale, 30 years of experience with adolescent behavioral issues, specialist in conflict resolution. All meaningless when confronted with the reality of how power actually worked at Ridgefield Academy. "I've been made aware of some concerns," Dr. Morrison began, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who'd navigated similar situations before. "There are reports that you've been having difficulty adjusting to our school culture." Zara sat in the ergonomic chair across from Dr. Morrison's mahogany desk, her injured face turned slightly away from the window's natural light. The burn had darkened to deep purple with edges of healing pink, the radiator's pattern still clearly visible 3 days later. Impossible to hide, impossible to explain away. "What kind of reports?" Zara asked. "Some students have expressed concern about your integration into the social environment here." Dr. Morrison consulted her notes, written in careful cursive on expensive letterhead. "There are suggestions that you might benefit from additional support services, perhaps some social skills coaching or peer mediation sessions." Through the office's soundproof windows, Zara could see Madison Thornfield walking across the courtyard with her usual entourage. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect life built on a foundation of perfect cruelty. The girl was currently starring in 3 different TikTok trends based on the Radiator incident, her follower count climbing daily. "Dr. Morrison," Zara said quietly, "what exactly have you been told about how I got this burn?" The counselor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "There are conflicting accounts of that incident. Some students report it was an accident during a chemistry lab. Others suggest it might have been self-inflicted as a way of gaining attention." Self-inflicted. The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. Zara felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. Not anger exactly, but recognition. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. "Have you seen the videos?" Zara asked. "I don't monitor student social media accounts unless there's a specific complaint filed through proper channels," Dr. Morrison replied. "And so far, no formal complaints have been submitted." Of course not. Filing a complaint would require admitting that Madison Thornfield, daughter of the man who'd funded the new library, the computer lab, and half the athletic department, was capable of deliberately burning another student's face. It would require acknowledging that a scholarship student's word carried weight equal to a donor family's reputation. "The burn happened in the chemistry lab," Zara said. "During lunch period, 7 other students were present, all of them recording video. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I can provide you with the appropriate paperwork," Dr. Morrison offered. "Of course, you should understand that any accusations against another student would need to be thoroughly investigated. False claims can have serious consequences for your standing here." The threat was politely worded but unmistakable. "Accuse Madison Thornfield of assault and face expulsion for making false accusations. Stay quiet and endure whatever came next." Either way, the system protected itself. Zara's phone buzzed with a notification. Another video had been posted, this one featuring Madison doing a comedy sketch about scholarship students who can't handle the heat. It already had 12,000 views and counting, with comments ranging from laugh-crying emojis to detailed suggestions about what else should be done to put her in her place. "I understand," Zara said, standing to leave. "Thank you for your time, Dr. Morrison." "Zara," the counselor called as she reached the door, "I want you to know that we're here to support all our students. Sometimes that means helping them understand which battles are worth fighting." The message was clear. This battle wasn't worth fighting. Zara Chen, scholarship student from the wrong side of town, should accept her place in the ecosystem and be grateful for whatever scraps of education she could salvage around the edges of her daily humiliation. But as Zara walked back through the hallways, past the trophy cases and honor roll plaques and portraits of distinguished alumni, she found herself thinking about something else entirely. Her father's voice, filtered through spotty satellite connection from whatever classified location his unit had been deployed to that year. Reconnaissance first, sweetheart. Always know your terrain before you engage. She'd been conducting reconnaissance for 3 days now, documenting everything with the methodical precision he'd taught her. Phone recordings of the harassment, screenshots of the social media posts, names, dates, locations, witnesses. A growing file of evidence that painted a very clear picture of systematic abuse enabled by institutional indifference. The burn on her face was healing, but the wound it represented went much deeper than tissue damage. It was evidence of a culture that valued money over morality, connections over consequences, image over integrity. A culture that could only survive in darkness, protected by silence and complicity. Zara Chen had no intention of staying silent much longer. That evening brought a new escalation. River Zhang, the quiet kid from her AP chemistry class, found Zara by her locker after school. His left eye was swollen shut, his lips split and bleeding, his vintage band t-shirt torn at the shoulder. The attack had been efficient and brutal, a reminder that Madison's reach extended beyond just primary targets. "They said I was your boyfriend," River whispered, his words slightly slurred by the swelling. "Said I needed to learn what happens to people who associate with scholarship trash." Zara's hands stilled on her combination lock. River wasn't her boyfriend. They'd barely spoken beyond lab partner necessities. But that distinction mattered less than the message being sent. Isolation through intimidation, punishment by association. Classic tactics designed to eliminate any potential support network. "Who did this?" she asked, though she already knew. "Madison's crowd, after last period in the parking lot." River touched his swollen eye gingerly. "Britt held my arms while Ashley and Kennedy took turns. Madison filmed the whole thing for her story. The parking lot, where security cameras had convenient blind spots and faculty supervision, was practically non-existent. Where expensive cars created visual barriers and engine noise masked screams. A perfect venue for consequences-free violence." "Did you report it?" River's laugh came out as a broken wheeze. "To who?" "My dad owns a restaurant. Their families own half the town. You think Principal Hammond wants to hear about how his biggest donor's children are beating up scholarship kids?" The raw honesty hit harder than any physical blow. River understood the same brutal mathematics that governed Zara's existence here. The precise calculation of worth based on family income and social connections. They were both expendable, both replaceable, both existing at the pleasure of people who viewed them as temporary inconveniences. "I'm transferring," River continued. "My parents are already looking at public schools across town. They said it's not worth the risk. Another victory for Madison's campaign. Another potential witness silenced through strategic violence. Another demonstration that resistance would be met with escalating consequences that extended far beyond the primary target." Zara helped River clean his wounds in the empty bathroom, using supplies from her mother's extensive first aid kit, antiseptic for the cuts, ice from the nurse's office for the swelling, careful documentation of the injuries with her phone's camera. Everything properly treated, everything properly recorded. "You should leave too," River said as she applied butterfly bandages to his split lip. "This isn't going to get better. People like us don't win against people like them. People like us." The phrase contained multitudes, the scholarship kids, the working-class families, the ones who counted every dollar and worked every angle just to exist in spaces they'd never truly belonged to. River was probably right. Statistically speaking, students in their position rarely achieved anything beyond survival. But River didn't know about the files Zara had been building, the systematic documentation of every incident, every threat, every attempt by the administration to minimize and deflect. He didn't know about the encrypted cloud storage, where she backed up every video, every screenshot, every piece of evidence that demonstrated the true culture of Ridgefield Academy. Most importantly, River didn't know about the phone call Zara had made the night before, a carefully worded conversation with her father's old unit, the ones who'd taught him about information warfare and strategic communication, the ones who understood that sometimes the best defense was a very public, very well-documented offense. "Maybe you're right," Zara said, finishing the bandages. "Maybe people like us don't win." But she was thinking about something else entirely, about how institutions like Ridgefield Academy depended on silence and complicity to maintain their carefully constructed images, about how social media could be a weapon that cut both ways, about how the same technology that had enabled her humiliation could be used to expose the system that protected her abusers. The burn on her face was healing nicely, the radiator pattern fading from angry purple to healing pink. But the documentation she'd gathered was growing stronger every day, building towards something that would make Madison Thornfield's viral videos look like amateur hour. River gathered his torn belongings and headed for the exit, probably for the last time. Another casualty of a war most people pretended wasn't happening, but as he reached the door, he turned back with something like hope flickering in his unswollen eye. "If you ever decide to fight back," he said quietly, "I know some people who might help. Transfer kids from other schools, kids who got out before it was too late. They remember." The offer hung in the air as he disappeared into the parking lot. Zara finished packing her backpack, her movements methodical and precise. Tomorrow would bring new cruelties, new videos, new demonstrations of power designed to break her spirit completely. But tonight, she had work to do. The precipice arrived on a grey Thursday morning when Madison Thornfield decided that burning Zara's face hadn't been enough. The target this time was Emma Vasquez, an 8th grade student whose only crime was accepting free lunch tickets without sufficient shame. The girl was small for her age, maybe 90 pounds soaking wet, with thick glasses and second-hand clothes that marked her as clearly as a scarlet letter. Zara found them in the stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floors, where the acoustics created a perfect echo chamber for screams. Madison had Emma pinned against the concrete wall while Britt and Ashley held her arms. The younger girl's face was streaked with tears and snot, her glasses knocked askew, her book bag torn open with contents scattered across the stairs. "Please," Emma was whispering, her voice barely audible above the sound of footsteps in the hallway above. "I didn't do anything. Please just let me go." "You exist," Madison hissed, her manicured fingers wrapped around Emma's throat. "That's what you did. You exist in our school, breathing our air, taking up space that belongs to people who actually matter." The phone cameras were rolling again, 3 different angles capturing Emma's terror with high-definition clarity. But this time, something was different. Madison's grip was tighter, her eyes brighter, her breathing faster. The violence had escalated beyond psychological torture into something genuinely dangerous. Zara could see the exact moment when Emma's face began to change color, when shortage of oxygen started affecting her brain function. The girl's struggles grew weaker, her eyes beginning to roll back, her small hands clawing ineffectively at Madison's arms. That was when Zara's training kicked in completely. The first move was textbook, a precise strike to Madison's wrist that forced her to release Emma's throat. The second was improvised, a foot sweep that sent Britt crashing into the stairwell railing. The third was pure instinct, catching Ashley's wrist as she swung her phone like a weapon, twisting until the device clattered down the concrete steps. The entire sequence lasted maybe 6 seconds. When it was over, Madison was on her knees holding her wrist. Britt was groaning against the railing. Ashley was cradling her twisted arm, and Emma was gasping for air but breathing freely. The silence that followed was absolute. "What the hell?" Madison finally whispered, staring up at Zara with something like confusion. What did you... But Zara wasn't looking at Madison anymore. She was helping Emma gather her scattered belongings, checking her throat for injury, making sure she could speak properly. The younger girl was shaking like a leaf, but otherwise unharmed, her glasses crooked but unbroken. "Are you okay?" Zara asked softly. Emma nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought they were going to... I know." Zara handed Emma her book bag and straightened her glasses with gentle fingers. "It's over now." "Is it, though?" Madison had recovered from her shock, and her voice carried a new quality, something cold and sharp and genuinely dangerous. "Because what I just saw was assault. What I just experienced was a scholarship kid attacking the daughter of Robert Thornfield." The threat crystallized in the air between them. Madison's father didn't just donate to Ridgefield Academy, he owned half the board of directors. One phone call from him could end Zara's scholarship, destroy any chance of college admission, ruin her family's precarious financial stability. The power imbalance wasn't just social anymore, it was existential. "I saw a student being strangled," Zara replied calmly. "I intervened to prevent serious injury or death." "You saw a misunderstanding being resolved between friends," Madison corrected. "Emma, tell her, we were just playing around, weren't we?" Emma's eyes darted between Zara and Madison, terror and calculation warring in her expression. She was 13 years old, from a family that couldn't afford lawyers or private schools or anything except the hope that their daughter might earn her way into a better life. Speaking truth would mean protection for others, but destruction for herself. "We were playing," Emma whispered, the words barely audible. Madison's smile was radiant with victory. "See? Just friends having fun. But you, scholarship girl, you assaulted me. You attacked a student whose family has given millions to this school. That's going to have consequences." The stairwell began to fill with other students, drawn by the commotion and the promise of drama. Phones emerged from pockets and backpacks, cameras trained on Zara like weapons. Within minutes, the video would be online with captions about scholarship students attacking their betters, about violent outsiders disrupting the peaceful academic environment. But as Zara looked around at the gathering crowd, she realized something had shifted. The fear was still there, the calculation of social cost versus moral action. But underneath it, something else was growing. Emma might have been too frightened to speak the truth, but everyone present had seen what really happened. Everyone had witnessed attempted strangulation being stopped by intervention that was both necessary and proportionate. And for the first time since arriving at Ridgefield Academy, Zara didn't feel alone. "Madison," said a voice from the crowd, "maybe we should just let this go." The speaker was Jonathan Pierce, son of the family that owned the largest law firm in town. Not someone who usually involved himself in social politics, but someone whose opinion carried weight with the other donor kids. His presence here, his suggestion of de-escalation, meant that cracks were beginning to appear in Madison's circle of supporters. "Let it go?" Madison's voice rose to a near shriek. "She attacked me. She put her hands on me." But other voices were joining Jonathan's now. Quiet murmurs about how Emma had looked like she was choking, about how Madison's grip had seemed too tight, about how maybe things had gone too far this time. The phone cameras were still recording, but the narrative they captured was no longer under Madison's complete control. Zara helped Emma to her feet and walked her toward the main hallway, moving slowly and carefully to demonstrate that she posed no ongoing threat. Behind them, Madison's voice grew more shrill as she demanded support from followers who were suddenly finding reasons to be elsewhere. The burn on Zara's face had faded to a faint pink pattern, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. But the real healing was just beginning, not of tissue damage, but of something deeper. The recognition that power wasn't always permanent, that fear wasn't always justified, that sometimes the right action at the right moment could shift entire ecosystems. As they reached the main hallway, Emma looked up with eyes that held something new alongside the lingering terror. "How did you know how to do that?" she asked. Zara considered her answer carefully. "My father taught me some things before he deployed. Self-defense basics, how to stay calm under pressure. I never thought I'd need them here. Will you teach me?" The question carried weight far beyond its simple words. Emma wasn't just asking about physical techniques. She was asking about resistance, about the possibility that people like them didn't have to accept whatever cruelty was deemed appropriate by their social superiors. "Yes," Zara said without hesitation, "I'll teach you everything I know." The response to Thursday's Stairwell incident spread through Ridgefield Academy's social ecosystem like wildfire, but the narrative that emerged wasn't the one Madison Thornfield had expected. The videos that went viral showed a small girl being strangled, while 3 others held her arms, followed by precise intervention that stopped the attack without excessive force. Emma's terrified face, Madison's vice-like grip, the moment when breathing became impossible, all captured in high-definition clarity from multiple angles. By Friday morning, Stairwell Strangle was trending across 3 different platforms, but the commentary wasn't celebrating Madison's dominance. Instead, thousands of comments dissected the dynamics of power and abuse at elite private schools. Child psychologists weighed in about strangulation as a form of assault. Legal experts discussed the difference between self-defense and aggression. Former students of similar institutions shared their own stories of systematic harassment enabled by wealth and institutional protection. Principal Hammond called an emergency assembly for first period, his usually polished demeanor showing cracks of genuine concern. The man understood media dynamics well enough to recognize when a story was spiraling beyond local control. Regional news outlets were already making inquiries about the school's disciplinary policies. Alumni donors were asking questions about the culture their contributions supported. Recent social media posts have mischaracterized student interactions at our institution, Hammond announced from the auditorium stage, his voice carrying across rows of designer backpacks and carefully styled hair. While we take all allegations seriously, it's important to understand that these videos lack proper context and may have been deliberately edited to create false impressions. Zara sat in the back row, watching the administrator's performance with clinical detachment. Hammond was following standard crisis management protocol: deny, deflect, discredit. Frame the evidence as misleading, the witnesses as unreliable, the victims as opportunistic troublemakers seeking attention and sympathy. But the strategy was failing in real time. Students were fact-checking his statements on their phones, sharing unedited video clips that contradicted his narrative, posting side-by-side comparisons that highlighted the administration's attempts at damage control. The digital generation didn't accept authorities' version of truth when primary source evidence was readily available. Madison Thornfield has been temporarily suspended pending a thorough investigation, Hammond continued, the words extracted like pulled teeth. However, I want to be clear that this suspension is purely precautionary and should not be interpreted as admission of wrongdoing. A murmur rippled through the auditorium. Madison Thornfield suspended, even temporarily, was unprecedented. Her family's financial contributions typically guaranteed immunity from anything resembling consequences. The fact that Hammond felt compelled to take even token action suggested that external pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. Zara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You need to see this." She opened her student account to find a message from an address she didn't recognize, containing a single attachment, a video file labeled Security Footage, Chemistry Lab, October 15th. Her heart rate accelerated as she realized what she was looking at. The official security recording of the Radiator incident, the footage that Principal Hammond had claimed didn't exist. The video quality was crystal clear, showing every detail of the attack from an overhead angle. Madison's deliberate pressure against Zara's head, the casual cruelty of the other participants, the calculated nature of the assault. Most importantly, it captured audio. Madison's voice clearly stating that the goal was to leave a permanent mark, to brand Zara as inferior. But the timestamp told a different story than the one Hammond had been telling. The video was recorded at 1:23 p.m. on October 15th, during lunch period when the chemistry lab was supposed to be locked and unoccupied. More significantly, the file properties showed it had been accessed and viewed multiple times by administration accounts, including Hammond's personal login. They had known, they had seen everything. They had chosen to cover it up. Zara forwarded the email to herself from 3 different accounts, saved copies to encrypted cloud storage, and sent screenshots to the journalists who'd been covering the story. By the time Hammond finished his damage control speech, the evidence of institutional complicity was already spreading across social media platforms. The afternoon brought a parade of visitors to the Chen family's modest apartment, reporters from local news stations, followed by representatives from regional papers, followed by a crew from CNN's education desk. Each interview was carefully managed by Zara's mother, who had taken emergency leave from the hospital to handle the media attention her daughter's situation was generating. "We want to be clear," Susan Chen said in her carefully practiced English, facing a camera crew in their cramped living room. "My daughter is not seeking money or fame. She wants to attend school without being burned, without being attacked, without being told she doesn't belong because her family works for a living." The burn unit nurse understood trauma better than most people. She'd seen what violence could do to the human body, had witnessed the long-term consequences of what seemed like minor injuries. The radiator pattern on her daughter's face would fade, but the psychological damage could last a lifetime if left untreated. "The school says the videos are misleading," asked Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. "They claim your daughter initiated the conflict that led to her injury." Susan Chen's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "My daughter weighs 115 pounds. She was held down by 4 students while a hot radiator burned through her skin. What part of that suggests she was the aggressor?" Meanwhile, the story was evolving beyond simple bullying narratives. Investigation into Ridgefield Academy's disciplinary records revealed a pattern of selective enforcement that protected donor families while punishing scholarship recipients. Financial documents showed that the Thornfield family's contributions had coincided with several incidents being quietly expunged from student records. Former teachers came forward with stories of being pressured to inflate grades for connected students while maintaining impossibly high standards for those without family influence. The scandal was becoming about more than Madison Thornfield's cruelty or Zara Chen's resistance. It was exposing an entire system built on the assumption that wealth could purchase immunity from consequences, that social status could override basic moral obligations, that institutions would always protect their financial interests at the expense of their educational mission. By evening, Ridgefield Academy was trending nationally. The school's carefully cultivated image as a beacon of academic excellence was crumbling under scrutiny that revealed it as a finishing school for the children of the wealthy, where lessons in entitlement superseded actual education. Zara's phone contained over 300 messages from students, parents, journalists, and strangers offering support, sharing similar stories, or requesting interviews. But the one that mattered most came from Emma Vasquez's mother. "Thank you for protecting my daughter. When can we start those self-defense lessons?" The message contained an address and a time. Sunday afternoon at the community center across town. Not the wealthy suburb where Ridgefield Academy maintained its manicured campus, but the working-class neighborhood where most of the scholarship students actually lived. where families understood that sometimes you had to fight for the right to exist in spaces that didn't want you. Zara typed back quickly, "I'll be there. And I'm bringing friends." The response surprised her with its simplicity and power. Because for the first time since arriving at Ridgefield Academy, Zara Chen had friends to bring. Students who'd been silenced by fear, parents who'd been marginalized by class differences, community members who understood that some battles were bigger than individual survival. The radiator burn on her face was almost completely healed now, barely visible except in certain lighting, but the movement it had sparked was just beginning to generate the kind of heat that could melt down entire institutions. Saturday morning brought the school board meeting that would determine whether Ridgefield Academy's culture of protected cruelty would continue or face genuine consequences. The auditorium overflowed with an audience unlike any previous gathering. Working parents who'd taken time off from jobs they couldn't afford to lose, students carrying handmade signs, community activists armed with documented evidence of systematic discrimination. Zara sat in the front row with her mother, both of them wearing their best clothes, Susan Chen in her hospital scrubs cleaned and pressed to perfection, Zara in the one dress she owned that didn't scream scholarship student. Behind them, Emma Vasquez huddled close to her parents, the bruises on her throat still faintly visible despite careful makeup application. The board members filed onto the stage looking like defendants approaching sentencing. These were wealthy, connected individuals, accustomed to controlling narratives and managing perceptions. But the past week had demonstrated the limits of their influence in the age of viral video and crowdsourced investigation. Robert Thornfield himself sat at the center of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit custom-tailored, his expression projecting the confident arrogance of a man who'd never faced real consequences for anything. Behind him sat Madison, her usual crowd noticeably absent, her social media accounts temporarily deactivated on the advice of her family's legal team. "We're here today to address recent allegations regarding student conduct at Ridgefield Academy," announced board chairwoman Patricia Henley. "While we take all such claims seriously, it's important to maintain perspective about isolated incidents that may have been blown out of proportion by social media attention." The opening statement landed with a thud in the packed auditorium. Isolated incidents, blown out of proportion. The same language administrators had been using for years to minimize systematic abuse, reduced to corporate buzzwords that fooled no one present. "Mrs. Henley," called out Maria Santos, a local reporter who'd been covering education issues for 15 years. "Can you explain why security footage of the Radiator incident was accessed by school administrators but never included in their investigation?" Henley's confident expression flickered. "I'm not familiar with the specific technical details of our security system operations. The footage shows your IT director downloading the video file within hours of the incident," Santos continued. "It also shows Principal Hammond viewing it multiple times. How is that not being familiar with technical details?" The questions came rapid fire after that, each one supported by documentation that previous investigations had been deliberately incomplete. Phone records showing communication between administrators and donor families immediately after incidents. Email chains discussing damage control strategies before victims had even reported injuries. Financial records demonstrating how disciplinary decisions correlated directly with family donation levels. But the real turning point came when River Zhang walked to the microphone, his face still showing faint bruises from his parking lot beating. The boy who'd been silenced through intimidation, whose family had been preparing to transfer schools, who represented every student who'd ever been told that speaking truth wasn't worth the cost. "I was attacked by Madison Thornfield and her friends because I talked to Zara Chen during chemistry class," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "They filmed it. They posted it online. They called it a lesson about what happens to people who associate with scholarship trash. He held up his phone, playing audio from the attack that clearly identified the perpetrators and their stated motivations. Madison's voice was unmistakable as she explained to her camera that River needed to learn his place in the social hierarchy. Principal Hammond told my parents it was a misunderstanding between friends, River continued. He said Madison was just playing around, and I must have misinterpreted her intentions. He said if we pursued the matter, it might affect my chances of getting into a good college. The auditorium erupted in angry murmurs. Robert Thornfield's face had gone pale, his legal team frantically taking notes, his daughter staring at the floor as if she could disappear through force of will alone. Then Emma Vasquez stood up, her small voice somehow carrying clearly through the auditorium's acoustics. They tried to strangle me in the stairwell. Madison said I didn't deserve to breathe the same air as people who actually mattered. If Zara hadn't stopped them, I would have passed out. Maybe worse. The testimony continued for over an hour, former students sharing stories of harassment that had driven them from the school. Current students describing a culture of fear that extended far beyond Madison's immediate circle. Parents detailing how their children had developed anxiety disorders, depression, eating disorders stemming from systematic psychological abuse that administrators dismissed as normal teenage behavior. Each story was supported by evidence, screenshots, recordings, medical records, police reports that had been filed but never seriously investigated. The pattern was undeniable. Ridgefield Academy had created an environment where wealth purchased the right to inflict suffering without consequences. The board will need time to review all this information, Henley announced as the testimony phase concluded. We'll schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss potential policy changes. But the crowd wasn't interested in delays or policy discussions. They wanted immediate action, concrete consequences, fundamental changes to the power structure that had enabled years of abuse. No more meetings, called out Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist whose own daughter had been a victim of Madison's campaign 3 years earlier. These aren't policy issues. These are criminal matters, assault, harassment, institutional cover-ups. The district attorney should be investigating, not the school board. The suggestion electrified the auditorium. Criminal charges would mean real consequences, professional investigations, legal standards of evidence that couldn't be manipulated by family influence or financial pressure. Robert Thornfield finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to ending conversations through displays of power. I think everyone needs to remember that we're talking about children here. Teenage mistakes that have been amplified by social media into something much larger than they actually are. Mr. Thornfield, said Susan Chen, rising from her seat with the quiet dignity of someone who'd spent years caring for people in their most vulnerable moments. Your daughter deliberately burned my child's face with a hot radiator. She filmed it. She posted it online. She made money from advertising revenue on videos of my daughter's pain. The final detail landed like a physical blow. Monetizing the torture videos hadn't been mentioned in previous coverage, but financial records from Madison's social media accounts told a clear story. Revenue from ads played before videos of Zara's humiliation, sponsorship deals that paid her to create content featuring systematic harassment of scholarship students. That's not, Thornfield stammered, his usual composure finally cracking. It's documented in her tax returns, Susan Chen continued. Your daughter made over $15,000 last year creating videos that featured the harassment and assault of other students. She's not a child making mistakes. She's an adult profiting from organized cruelty. The auditorium fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't bullying anymore. It was a business model. Madison Thornfield had monetized the systematic torture of her classmates, turning their pain into a revenue stream that funded her designer wardrobe and luxury lifestyle. Board Chairwoman Henley looked like she'd swallowed something poisonous. The board will convene an emergency session tonight to discuss immediate suspension pending criminal investigation. But as the meeting adjourned and the crowd began to disperse, Zara realized something fundamental had shifted. The victims were no longer isolated, the evidence was no longer deniable, and the institution that had protected Madison Thornfield was no longer willing to sacrifice its own survival for her family's reputation. The burn on her face had healed completely, leaving only the faintest outline visible in direct sunlight. But the fire she'd helped ignite was spreading far beyond Ridgefield Academy, reaching other schools, other communities, other young people who'd been told that their suffering was simply the price of admission to elite institutions. Monday morning brought news trucks lining the circular drive of Ridgefield Academy. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward like technological flowers seeking signal instead of sunlight. National media had discovered the story over the weekend, elevating it from local scandal to symbol of broader institutional failures across America's private school system. Zara walked through the front entrance to find the hallways transformed. Gone was the casual cruelty that had characterized daily life for scholarship students. In its place was a nervous energy, conversations that stopped when she approached, sidelong glances that held something approaching respect rather than contempt. Madison Thornfield was nowhere to be seen. Her locker stood empty, her usual table in the cafeteria unoccupied, her social media accounts deleted or restricted. The girl who'd ruled through fear and financial privilege had simply vanished, leaving behind only the legal consequences that money couldn't make disappear. "Zara Chen to the principal's office, please." The announcement crackled through speakers that had carried similar summons for months, but this time felt different. Zara gathered her books and walked through hallways where other students nodded respectfully instead of turning away in calculated indifference. Principal Hammond's office had been stripped of its casual authority. The man behind the mahogany desk looked like he'd aged a decade in a week, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain and sleepless nights. Behind him stood two unfamiliar figures, a woman in a serious suit who radiated legal authority and a man with a badge visible beneath his jacket. "Miss Chen," Hammond began, his voice lacking its usual smooth confidence, "I want to apologize for how your concerns were handled by this institution. A thorough investigation has revealed significant failures in our disciplinary processes." The words felt hollow, extracted under legal pressure rather than genuine remorse. But they represented something unprecedented, an admission that the system had failed, that students like Zara deserved protection rather than persecution. "The district attorney's office is pursuing criminal charges against Madison Thornfield for assault and harassment," added the woman in the suit. "We'll need your cooperation as a witness, but we want you to know that the legal system takes these matters seriously even when educational institutions have failed to do so." Detective Morrison, no relation to the school counselor, leaned forward with the matter-of-fact professionalism of someone who'd seen too much institutional corruption to be surprised by anything. "The financial records from Madison's social media accounts show over $40,000 in revenue from content featuring your assault and harassment. That's felony-level exploitation, not teenage bullying. $40,000. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Madison had made more money from torturing her classmates than Zara's mother earned in 8 months of 12-hour shifts at the burn unit. The monetization of suffering had reached levels that transformed cruelty into organized crime. "What about the other victims?" Zara asked. "We're in contact with 17 families so far," Detective Morrison replied. Madison's harassment campaign affected far more students than anyone initially realized. The video evidence goes back almost 3 years, showing a clear pattern of escalating violence enabled by institutional protection. The scope was staggering. 3 years of systematic abuse, dozens of victims, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue generated from filming and distributing assault videos. Madison Thornfield hadn't been a troubled teenager acting out. She'd been running a business that specialized in the profitable humiliation of vulnerable students. The school board has voted to implement immediate policy changes, Hammond announced, consulting notes written in someone else's handwriting. Zero tolerance for harassment regardless of family connections, mandatory reporting of all assault allegations to law enforcement, and creation of an independent oversight committee that includes community representatives. Real changes forced by external pressure rather than internal wisdom. Ridgefield Academy would survive the scandal, but its culture of protected cruelty had been permanently damaged. Future students would inherit protections that Zara's generation had been forced to create through suffering and resistance. But as Zara left the principal's office, she realized the most important changes were happening beyond policy reforms and criminal charges. Students who'd been silenced by fear were finding their voices. Parents who'd accepted systematic abuse as the price of elite education were demanding accountability. Communities that had deferred to wealth and privilege were insisting on basic human dignity. The hallway bulletin boards told the story in posted announcements. New counseling services for harassment victims. Expanded scholarship programs funded by community donations rather than donor families. Student-led workshops on recognizing and reporting abuse. Anti-bullying initiatives that focused on systematic oppression rather than individual conflicts. Zara's phone buzzed with a text from Emma Vasquez. Self-defense class had 37 people show up yesterday. Can you teach us more next week? 37 people. Scholarship students, younger siblings, community kids who'd heard about what happened and wanted to learn how to protect themselves and others. The radiator burn that was supposed to mark Zara as victim had instead marked her as someone who refused to accept suffering as inevitable. Another text, this one from River Zhang. Staying at Ridgefield. New policies mean I can actually learn here without getting beaten up. Thank you for not giving up. By lunch period, the transformation was visible in 100 small details. Scholarship students sitting at tables previously reserved for donor families. Conversations between social groups that had never interacted before. A cafeteria atmosphere that felt more like actual teenage life and less like a carefully orchestrated hierarchy of wealth and privilege. Zara sat with Emma, River, and a growing circle of students who'd found courage in collective action rather than individual survival. They talked about normal teenage things, homework assignments, weekend plans, college applications. But underneath those conversations ran a deeper current of shared experience and mutual protection. The burn on her face had healed completely, leaving behind skin that was actually stronger than before. Scar tissue was tougher than original skin, more resistant to future damage, better able to withstand pressure and heat. The same was true for everything else that had been damaged and repaired during these weeks of systematic cruelty and organized resistance. The students, the community, the institution itself, all emerged from the fire changed, but stronger, more resistant to the kind of corruption that had flourished in darkness and silence. Madison Thornfield would face trial as an adult for charges that included assault, harassment, and exploitation of minors. Her family's wealth would buy excellent legal representation, but it couldn't purchase immunity from consequences that had been documented in high-definition video from multiple angles. More importantly, the culture that had produced and protected her was dissolving under scrutiny that revealed its fundamental incompatibility with actual education. Ridgefield Academy would continue to exist, but it would never again be a place where money could purchase the right to inflict suffering without consequences. The revolution started small, person by person, choice by choice, moment by moment. But revolutions had a way of spreading, especially when they were built on something as simple and powerful as the recognition that every human being deserved dignity regardless of their family's bank account. 3 months later, Zara Chen stood at the podium of the Congressional Subcommittee on Education Oversight, her testimony being broadcast live across multiple cable networks. The hearing was examining how private schools used federal tax benefits while maintaining cultures of systematic harassment and discrimination. The assumption was that I should be grateful, she told the assembled representatives and cameras. Grateful for the opportunity to attend an elite institution, grateful for the chance to receive a superior education, grateful enough to accept whatever treatment was deemed appropriate for someone of my economic background. Her voice carried clearly through the marble halls of the Capitol building, each word chosen carefully to convey both personal experience and broader systemic failures. Behind her sat rows of other students, parents, teachers and administrators whose stories had emerged in the wake of Ridgefield Academy's exposure. But education shouldn't require acceptance of abuse as a prerequisite for learning. No student should have to choose between academic advancement and basic human dignity. No family should have to weigh their child's safety against their future opportunities. The statistics she presented painted a devastating picture of institutional complicity across dozens of private schools. Sexual assault rates covered up to protect enrollment numbers. Harassment campaigns enabled through selective enforcement of disciplinary policies. Mental health crises ignored when they affected students whose families couldn't purchase administrative attention. Madison Thornfield is currently serving 18 months in juvenile detention for assault and exploitation, Zara continued. But she was a product of a system that taught her that wealth could purchase immunity from consequences. The real perpetrator was an educational culture that valued money over morality. Representative Sarah Martinez of California leaned forward with evident interest. Ms. Chen, what specific reforms do you believe would prevent similar situations in other institutions? Mandatory reporting requirements that can't be waived by administrative discretion, independent oversight committees with community representation, financial transparency that shows how disciplinary decisions correlate with family donation levels, and criminal prosecution for institutional officials who enable assault through deliberate inaction. The recommendations were supported by expert testimony from child psychologists, legal scholars, and education policy researchers. But the most powerful evidence came from the students themselves, young people who'd been told their suffering was simply the price of admission to elite institutions, now speaking truth to power with voices that couldn't be silenced by family wealth or institutional pressure. Emma Vasquez, now a confident sophomore who led the student advocacy group at Ridgefield Academy, testified about the lasting psychological effects of attempted strangulation and systematic intimidation. River Zhang, who'd become student body president after the old guard graduated or transferred, described how institutional change had transformed the entire educational environment. "We learned that silence wasn't strength," River explained to the subcommittee. "It was collaboration with abuse. Real strength came from documenting everything, supporting each other, and refusing to accept that systematic cruelty was simply part of growing up." The hearing concluded with commitments to investigate federal funding for private schools that failed to meet basic safety standards. New legislation would require transparent reporting of disciplinary incidents, independent investigation of harassment allegations, and criminal liability for administrators who enabled abuse through deliberate negligence. But the real victory was visible in the gallery behind the witnesses. Dozens of young people who'd found their voices, discovered their power, and learned that institutions could be changed when enough people refused to accept that suffering was inevitable. Zara's mother watched from the front row, wearing her hospital scrubs with the same quiet pride she'd shown throughout the past year. The burn unit nurse understood better than most that healing required both professional treatment and time, that some injuries left scars that served as reminders rather than sources of shame. As the hearing adjourned and the crowd began to disperse, Zara received a text that made her smile despite the formal setting. It was from a student at a prep school in Connecticut, where similar exposure had led to similar reforms. Starting our first self-defense class next week. 23 people signed up. Thank you for showing us it was possible. The movement had spread far beyond Ridgefield Academy, reaching schools across the country where students had been told that their suffering was simply the cost of educational opportunity. Each exposure led to new investigations, new reforms, new recognition that institutional change was possible when enough people refused to accept systematic cruelty as normal. That evening, Zara stood on the steps of the Capitol building as the sun set over Washington, D.C., her face unmarked by any trace of the radiator burn that had healed months ago. The scar tissue was stronger than original skin, more resistant to damage, better able to withstand pressure and heat. The same was true for everything else that had been damaged and rebuilt during those weeks of systematic abuse and organized resistance. The students, the families, the communities, the institutions, all emerged from the fire changed but stronger, more resistant to the corruption that flourished in darkness and silence. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from Madison Thornfield herself. I know you'll never forgive me, but I want you to know that I understand now what I did was wrong. The money, the videos, the power, none of it was worth destroying so many lives. I hope the changes you've created prevent anyone else from becoming what I became. Zara stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without response. Some wounds healed better without constant reminding. Some growth happened best in silence. Some justice was more powerful when it focused on prevention rather than punishment. The burn on her face was completely gone now, but the fire it had ignited continued to spread across institutions that had grown comfortable with systematic cruelty. Real change, the kind that lasted generations, required both individual courage and collective action. It required people willing to document everything, support each other, and refuse to accept that suffering was simply part of growing up. Zara Chen had learned to use the tools that were intended to humiliate her, social media, viral videos, public exposure, to create accountability where none had existed before. The radiator that was meant to mark her as victim had instead marked the beginning of a movement that transformed how America's elite educational institutions treated their most vulnerable students. The revolution started small, person by person, choice by choice, moment by moment, but it grew into something that couldn't be bought, silenced, or intimidated into submission. It grew into the recognition that every human being deserved dignity regardless of their family's economic status, and that institutions claiming educational mission had to actually educate rather than simply indoctrinate students into accepting systematic abuse as normal. Standing on those Capitol steps as darkness fell over the city, Zara understood that the real victory wasn't personal. It was structural. Future students would inherit protections that her generation had been forced to create through suffering and resistance. The culture of protected cruelty that had flourished for generations in America's elite schools was ending, replaced by systems of accountability that made systematic abuse both visible and impossible to ignore. Her reflection caught in the building's polished granite, showing a young woman who'd learned that sometimes the best response to systematic oppression was systematic exposure. The radiator burn had healed completely, leaving behind skin that was stronger than before, more resistant to future damage, better able to withstand whatever pressure and heat the world might bring. The same was true for everything else that had been transformed during those months of organized resistance. Students who'd been silenced by fear had found their voices. Communities that had deferred to wealth and privilege were demanding basic human dignity. Institutions that had protected cruelty through willful blindness were being forced to see clearly. The movement that began with a radiator burn in a chemistry lab had become something larger than any individual story. A recognition that systematic change was possible when enough people refused to accept that suffering was simply the price of admission to elite institutions. As Zara walked down the Capitol steps toward her mother's waiting car, her phone filled with messages from students across the country who were documenting their own experiences, supporting each other through difficult confrontations with institutional power, and learning that silence wasn't strength, but collaboration with abuse. The real revolution was just beginning.